The Morphin Grid, the source of the Power Rangers' power. That kind of sounds weird, Power Rangers' power. Anyways, though never thoroughly explained, it's only been briefly touched upon in near 30 years of the franchise history, with only a few key pieces of evidence to lead up onto. I'll be showing you how the Morphin Grid works, why it works, how, what, you know the 5 W's, who, what, when, where, why? I'm going to show you all of it. This is the Morphin Grid explained. Let's get right into it. Yo, what's up everybody, it's Este here. Welcome back to the video. We got a real cool one because we'll be explaining the Morphin Grid today. You hear it all through the Power Rangers universe. Morphin Grid this, Morphin Grid that, the Shattered Grid. It's the Morphin Grid. It's the main centerpiece, the epicenter of the Power Rangers universe. It is the source of their power, their abilities, their Zords, Morphers, weapons, etc. But we really don't know how it works. Even in the past few years, people are questioning, what's the Morphin Grid? It's only been briefly said a few times, but we don't really know how it works. In some series, they have different names for the Morphin Grid. I'll get into that and many more in this video. So 250 likes, we're finally doing it. We're explaining the Morphin Grid. I'm going to tell you all the secrets that the Morphin Grid has kept to us. Not really, but we're finding it out today. Let's get into it. Now, the Morphin Grid, if you don't know, you should know. It's an energy field where the Power Rangers get their power, regardless of age, gender, heights, city origin, if they're a robot, if they're an alien. If you're a person that wants power, good power or bad power, I'll get to that in a minute, the Morphin Grid is for you, and that's where you get the power. It was first mentioned all the way back in 1993 by our boys Zordon and Alpha, our first mentor and robot ally of the Power Rangers. And these are the guys that made that first connection to the Morphin Grid to make our first team of Rangers, the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. We later find out in 2007 during Once a Ranger that it wasn't just the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. Every generation of Power Rangers has a link to the Morphin Grid, even the ones in the future, like SPD and Time Force. How does it work though? It's the Morpher. Each team, this is upside down. Each team has their own link to the Morphin Grid with their Morphers. Once morphed, their cellular body gets overflown essentially by power from the Morphin Grid, giving them the power, the abilities, and the protection of Morphin Grid. You know when the Power Rangers show sparks or smoke coming out of their suits? Yeah, that's so they don't cut up and get an injury and bleed. It's legitimately the Morphin Grid protecting them. Those powers and abilities that the Morphin Grid has is called Morphin Energy. The Morphin Energy can interact with matter all throughout the universe and either create things or delete things. He also used it to create Christmas decorations and gifts in the Christmas episodes of MMPR. The Morphin Grid, I know, an all-powerful being, some even may say it's sentient, but let's hop into the history of the grid and see what's all the fuzz about. People still say that fuzz? What's all the fuzz about? I don't know. In the almost 30 years of the franchise, we have seen that different types of Rangers have different links to the Morphin Grid. The Ninja Rangers, the Lightspeed Rangers, Ancient Samurai Rangers. All these people have a different link to the Morphin Grid. And we might just question, how did you connect the powers of the Morphers to the grid? It's all very confusing. It's easy to say for some teams like Lightspeed Rescue, SPD, Time Force, where those seasons are more technological based. But what about the other seasons that aren't necessarily technological, like Samurai, or Mystic Force, or Wild Force? How does that necessarily work? Maybe magic has a little thing in it, ancient samurai things, maybe that has something to do with it. Animals, spirits from within, I don't know. This isn't Jungle Fury. Look, even Lord Zed knows about the Morphin Grid. In one episode of MMPR, he said that the Morphin Grid is a balance of good and evil. A prime example of this is Power Rangers in Space. We have the good Rangers, the In-Space Rangers, and the evil Rangers of the season, the Psycho Rangers. Yes, the Psycho Rangers do get their power from the Morphin Grid, but also from Dark Spectre. So two different sources, they're Rangers. So, kaboom. A explosion of evilness. One interesting thing about the Morphin Grid is that there can't be two of the same Ranger at once. Zordon said this when Kimberly went back in time and wanted to give her power coin to her ancestor. But Zordon says that there's too much pink energy, and too much pink energy is negative energy. We can also see this in Dino Thunder, where the white Dino Thunder, Trent, versus the evil Dino Thunder Ranger. There can't be two Dino Thunder Rangers in the same time. And we see this because the clone of him was eventually weakened after a long amount of time of fighting the other Ranger. And you know what? It makes sense. But Zordon should have been more specific when he said too much pink energy is too much negative, whatever. Because team-up episodes exist, and we see two of the same color every time. So really, let me explain that. It's because you can have two Pink Rangers from different teams. They have different links to the Morphin Grid, different skill sets, different statistics, so those two can exist. But two of the same Ranger, that's a big no-no. Fast forward years and years and years to Dino Thunder, when we see Tommy Oliver return as the Black Dino Thunder Ranger. Tommy found the grid's physical form and hid that in the cyber cafe for some reason. It looks like a volcano science project gone wrong. It looks really weird, and I don't know. I made a video about that. It's the Dino Thunder last episode. Go check it out. Icon on your screen. It was very weird. I don't know how that happens, but if you touch it, you see the history of your Ranger team or even the past, and you can even see into the future. SPD, we'll get into it in a minute. In Operation Overdrive, once a Ranger, the Morphin Grid was a real big part of the plot for that episode, because we saw that the main villains of Operation Overdrive basically broke the Morphin Grid. We saw electrical things flying over there. Alpha had to go in there. So it really means that the Morphin Grid is a physical space. It's a physical thing that we can enter in ourselves. Where is it though? Where does it exist? Is it in our minds? Is it in our, where is it? I don't know. Alpha got in there somehow. So what is it? Is it a volcano? Is it an actual grid? How does that work? But you can see how big the Morphin Grid is. The Morphin Grid is basically even glitched. The Rangers might just lose their powers at all. So if the Morphin Grid is gone, how do the Rangers get their powers? In some cases, in Mighty Morphin, we saw that Zordon could give some of his energy to Tommy so that he can return as the Green Ranger. The Sentinel-9 in Once a Ranger can also give his energy to some past Rangers so that they can also become Rangers once more. In Super Mega Force, the blue Super Mega Force Ranger, Noah, has the legendary Ranger database, which sees the history of all Rangers prior to him. That history is, of course, saved in the Morphin Grid, like how Tommy did that in his time in Dino Thunder. Today, 2019, 2020, Power Rangers Beast Morphers, Nate Silva, the Gold Ranger, has his own link to the Morphin Grid. As is more technological based, the grid uses Morph X, and that's their version of the grid, kind of, sort of. It's the power source. And through the connection of the grid in the past, fights with Rita Repulsa and Galvanax and all things through history, we can use that to use the Morph X in order to give these new Beast Morphers their powers. And basically, the whole plot of Beast Morphers really is Evox trying to take over Morph X, essentially take over the Morphin Grid. And that's where the Beast Morphers come in. They fight the virus and fight everything so they don't infect the Morphin Grid and essentially destroy their powers or the whole Power Rangers universe. So there's that, right? But there's also Morphin Grid in other cases of Power Rangers in the future in 2025, which is 5 years from now. Kat Manx and a group of scientists, the parents of the SPD Rangers, were in a science lab building up the SPD powers. They created the morpher technology used by the SPD Rangers, and they also had that side effect of basically mutating their human side with powers, basically. That's how the SPD Rangers had their powers. They had the Fist of Steel, the multiple copies, the aura thing. Those are all side effects of their experimentation with the Morphin Grid in order to create the SPD Rangers. Kat later also uses the Morphin Grid in the Dino Thunder crossover to review previous Ranger battles of Dino Thunder, and that's how we got back the return of the Dino Gems in the SPD crossover. And then we have the alternate dimension. That's, of course, Power Rangers RPM, where Dr. K has the biofield. And the biofield, just like Morph X, can easily have a virus, can easily be hacked into. That's why we see in the final episodes where Vengex destroys the Gold and Silver Rangers and the RPM Zords. But the biofield is the electrical force that gives the Rangers their powers, their Zords, and their special abilities. It was never really implied in the show that the biofield is the Morphin Grid, but come on. It's the powers. Yes, it's the Morphin Grid. And of course, later on in the comics, Dr. K tells us that Lord Draken's Black Dragon cannons were designed to disrupt the grid connections, and also the biofield, as they're, of course, one and the same. And that's really the whole thing of Shattered Grid. Shattered Grid is basically Tommy, or Lord Draken, should I say, specifically in battle for the grid, collecting these morphers so that he can level up and use their Rangers' connections to the grid to power himself up. And you'll see that throughout Shattered Grid, where he basically destroys all these different Ranger teams. So Shattered Grid, the comics, are a big part of that. But that's really it. It's really kind of a mystery at this point. If you want to know more information, I recommend checking out my theory on the sentient Morphin Grid. But we know that for a fact that you can't have two or more of the same Ranger. The Morphin Grid is, of course, the source for special superhero like abilities. Why am I messing up on my words today? And if hacked, you can easily disrupt the Rangers' powers, so they won't be Power Rangers anymore. Other than that, it's really all up to the mind and up to you guys to creatively tell me how the Morphin Grid's like. I want to know from you. Let me know in the comments down below, how do you think the Morphin Grid works? How do teams like the Ninja Rangers, Gosei, like how do they get their powers in the Morphin Grid? Gosei, man, I can tell Gosei, when you have these sentient beings, you know, that are just more powerful than anything from different planets, I'm pretty sure that these guys have their own ways. But for us regular humans, how do we get into the Morphin Grid? Is there a specific way we got to program our morphers? Do we got a number to call? I don't know. But anyways, I try my best to explain the Morphin Grid. That was the history of the Morphin Grid and all the instances of how it works, what you can do with it. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you learned something today. Let me know in the comments down below what do you want to see next. I'm Este. I'm the Don Fuego on Twitter, not Don Fuego on Instagram. Hope you have a great day. Of course, and as always, stay awesome. Let's go say something else. I don't know. It's morphin time. I don't know. Stay awesome.